Mr. Alfred E. Harrell III. Thank you.
All right, we'll delay there, right? Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, right? Okay, outstanding. I want to give Terry a round of applause and thank her for all of her hard work. She's been doing this for us now for a little over 2 years, and I think she's done a wonderful job of bringing really important content to the Valdry Center and its programming. My welcome will not be long because the gentleman you're going to hear from today knows more about this center than I do. In 2016, we reached out to the Kellogg Foundation because we thought we had a good idea. An idea to start a center for philanthropy, an institute on philanthropy, but particularly to educate communities of color around this nation on how philanthropy really works and how it can be meaningfully activated in their communities. The Kellogg Foundation responded and said, we want to study this a little bit more. And so they assigned who became a very good friend, Dr. David Maurrasse, to us to explore this opportunity. And for a period of about a year and a half, David and I and other constituents, as well as not-for-profit practitioners, thought critically about the work that could be done at a Center for Philanthropy at a historically Black institution. And we formulated, right, the whole program model over that year and a half. David Maurrasse is a scholar, an expert in the field of philanthropy and not-for-profit studies, and has been invaluable to us as we have launched this program, the first of its kind at any historically Black institution. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you my friend, colleague, and Dr. David Maurrasse. All right.
Good morning, everybody. It is just fantastic to be here. Thank you, Al, and thank you, Terry, for the introduction and the welcome to the Valdry Center in this current iteration, which is just incredible and incredibly exciting because, as Al just mentioned to you, back in 2016, this idea was in development. And just to say a little bit more about myself, David Maurrasse, and I'm the founder and president of a company called Marga Incorporated, which is a consulting firm that provides strategic advice and research to philanthropic initiatives and community partnerships. And we had been working with the Kellogg Foundation in another capacity back around 2016. And as Al mentioned, we got this great opportunity to be a part of developing something unprecedented, which is a center on philanthropy at a historically Black college and university. And it was just a thrill and an honor to be a part of that. And I remember that original conversation that I had with Kellogg about it because we were at a conference and I was sitting next to an executive at the Kellogg Foundation, and we were having a conversation about something entirely different. And she brings up this idea and says, we got this proposal from these folks at Southern University. And she starts telling me about it and says that there are alumni, the Valdry brothers, who have put up $1 million to help get this going. There's an idea for a building. And of course, we're actually standing in the building right now at this moment, which is just incredibly exciting and just wonderful to feel the physical presence of actually being here and seeing an idea come to fruition in this particular way. And they basically said, we need somebody to figure out, can this really be done? Can this be done? This idea that is in development, can this be made real? And that really was the charge. and I was introduced to Al, and we hit it off, I think, immediately, and had some very long conversations. And then ultimately, what resulted from that was a process of interviewing multiple different stakeholders throughout the university, in the community, just trying to hear about if there were such a thing like the Valdry Center on Philanthropy to come to fruition and be a real thing. How would it be beneficial to you? Could you use it? Is this valuable? And with all these conversations, we came up with a particular vision for what this could look like. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what that vision was back then, and talk a little bit about what the Valdry Center is now. So there's slides here. There's a lot of information on these slides. These can be made available to you. I'm not going to read every word on the slides, and there may be things that might be hard to decipher from the audience and elsewhere because the type may be too small. But just want to get us into where we are, to just go back here in terms of, as I mentioned, in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Valdry Center and the original feasibility study and what was involved in that, and what are some overall reflections in terms of where the Valdry Center is now, and talk a little bit about the original vision. What we had imagined were 7 different components of the Valdry Center to develop over a 7-year period. And so we're kind of at the tail end of that period when the Valdry Center's work actually began to where we're entering at this point in time. So it's a great moment to do a little bit of reflection. And of course, like in any initiative that's new and exciting and that's developing, there are discoveries along the way. There are things that happen that you didn't anticipate. And so I want to just highlight some of those things and then talk a little bit about the future of the Valdry Center. And people may have ideas or questions to put to me for our conversation about that, and just wrap up a little bit on the concept of organizational life cycles. All organizations have life cycles of development, just like human beings. People start out in infancy and then they grow, they become adolescents, they become adults. There's the reality for organizations and initiatives which are very similar. And so Marga Incorporated, my company's been around since 2000. So it's 24 years in now with that company. And we've had our own experiences with organizational life cycles and maturing and developing over time. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. So just Terry already mentioned to you, what is the mission of the Valdry Center? So here is that same mission. So I'm not going to belabor this point anymore, but it's an exciting mission and it's an important mission, and it has great capacity and potential that I think in some ways is unique and distinctive, partly because the Valdry Center is at an HBCU. And so right now, there are 6 program strands in the Valdry Center: research, degree programs, educational initiatives, social entrepreneurship programming, customized nonprofit capacity building, and seminars and certificates. And that's the way it is at this particular point in time. And there are other dimensions of the Valdry Center that are important to note in terms of where the Valdry Center is now. This is the first center on philanthropy at an HBCU. There are various centers on philanthropy out there. If you go to the site of something like the Council on Foundations, you'll see a listing of different centers on philanthropy that are based at universities that are out there, right? So there's a list of a little over 20 different entities, and the Valdry Center is on that list. And it's the only one that is at an HBCU. HBCUs, as you know, being here at Southern University, have an incredible track record in terms of developing human beings from many different starting points in life, and have been very successful in that regard, and have really played a tremendous role in developing the Black community as a whole. There are lessons that come from what HBCUs can do and the value that HBCUs bring that translate very well and nicely into a center on philanthropy, which positions the Valdry Center a little bit differently than some centers that are in other types of institutions of higher education. So leveraging that, I think, is important, and I think the Valdry Center has been doing that. This is a state-of-the-art building that we are sitting and standing in at this particular moment in time, and this is just one of the very, very important assets of the Valdry Center at this moment. And I can remember when it was an idea and a concept, and as I mentioned before, it is just incredibly just an amazing development to see it as a real thing and how it's grown and evolved. This building is centrally located on the campus, but also with real access to the outside community. It's easy to come onto this campus and into this building. And so what I'm hearing is that it's utilized quite a bit, which is important. This Valdry Center also has an advisory board, which has been really valuable because it's been able to bring in national leaders in philanthropy who are now playing a direct role in helping to shape the direction and future of the Valdry Center and opening up opportunities in many different ways. The Southern Foundation is now here in this building, and of course, Al is in that role at the Southern Foundation, which is how we got connected. And to see how the Valdry Center has emerged from the Southern Foundation has been incredible, and it also really demonstrated the power of a philanthropic arm, so to speak, of a university to be able to spawn something that has the kind of value that the Valdry Center brings to the table. The Valdry Center also has an endowment, and this was an important part of our early conversations about the importance of a center like this. To create a center that would be sustained over time, to create a center that wouldn't have to continually raise money. Obviously, the endowment, that's a big goal that for any academic center, there are only so many academic centers that can boast being endowed. There's a lot of work that's required to get there, but the Valdry Center does have an endowment, even though it's not a huge endowment. It has an endowment, so that idea has become real and it materialized as well. And this is really, as I mentioned before, in terms of the uniqueness of being at an HBCU, it really makes the Valdry Center an asset to communities of color, and lessons can be drawn from that on multiple different levels, nationally and beyond. And also, one of the things that we talked about early on was making sure to leverage some of the existing resources at Southern University. And so the Valdry Center is in position to provide degrees, but by way of a partnership with a school of government, which is already on campus, that was already providing degrees through nonprofits and philanthropy studies. So that was an important piece of this as well. So back to that original feasibility study, which ultimately that process that Al talked about of about a year and a half resulted in a report that was presented to the Valdry Center in 2017. And so the process was already underway in terms of creating the center at that particular point in time. You've already heard the background in terms of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. The truth of the matter is that we wanted the Kellogg Foundation to provide endowment support for the Valdry Center. We didn't exactly get to that particular point, but the Kellogg Foundation was tremendously supportive in the early days, and really we wouldn't have been able to create this vision without them. And so this whole study that Al mentioned at the beginning was really an opportunity to comprehensively gauge whether the Valdry Center could become a real thing and become an actual relevant initiative to the university as well as to the community. And as I mentioned before, several interviews took place on campus and in the community. And in a lot of ways, we wanted to make sure that this would be a demand-driven enterprise, that we would have a good sense of the potential value that the Valdry Center could bring to the community and to these various different constituents on campus and in general. So ultimately, in the feasibility study, we did conclude that yes, it is possible. It is possible to create the Valdry Center and to envision a Valdry Center with multiple different components and to evolve those components over time, and that this could be built partly around the constituents who have expressed some sense of demand and some sense of desire for a center like Valdry to be able to meet particular needs in those particular constituents. So we really built it around that and began to imagine a phased development of multiple different programs and initiatives. And really, you're going to need the right network of people. Ultimately, it comes down to human capital to make a center like this work. So ultimately, you saw there were 6 strands that were presented early on in terms of what the Valdry Center is now. When we envisioned the development of the Valdry Center back in 2017, the idea was to look at 7 strands. And so there's a lot on this particular slide, which is lifted directly from the original report. As I mentioned, you can get this and for your own records and look at some of the details there. But you can see the degree program. We originally envisioned a degree program. What would make that work was the partnership with the Nelson Mandela School of Government, because it was an existing degree program on campus. And so link the common interest between the center and that program, make it happen. You can see also that we imagined the evolution. Though here we're talking about the evolution of the Valdry Center, we imagined a phased process over time. And you can see this particular component, the degree program, we imagined in between the 3rd and 5th year of the Valdry Center's development that this would be a fully functional dimension of the Valdry Center's work. The Social Entrepreneurship Fellowship. So there's some dimension of social entrepreneurship that currently exists in the Valdry Center. We had imagined a cohort-based fellowship program where there were people with ideas from the community and from the campus who would get support over time. The Innovation Center next door would be used as an opportunity to give people the space and the support over a 2-year period to ultimately develop their ideas, social entrepreneurship ideas. So, for example, if somebody wanted to create a new initiative on environmental racism, that they could actually create that program and get the support to make that a reality. So that was part of the thinking behind that original Social Entrepreneurship Fellowship. And you'll see, interestingly here, faith programming. So there was an original vision of having some faith programming in the center, which would provide capacity building support to churches. I'm going back to the notion of being demand driven, that there were conversations that took place, particularly with Baptist leaders, about trying to find ways to leverage nonprofit management and philanthropic support and studies and learning and capacity from a university-based center like Valdry to provide technical assistance to churches. So you can see that this is not one of the current 6. So that is one part of the evolution. We imagine that being fully functional right away, partly because of what was being articulated to us. We were being told that this was an immediate need at that particular point in time. So that's a longer story in terms of why or why not that didn't ultimately develop. And customized nonprofit capacity building, similarly, we spoke to a number of nonprofit organizations, some larger nonprofits, some local foundations in the community, who expressed the desire to invest in capacity building for maybe their grantees, for small organizations in the community. And this was something that we thought ultimately would evolve over time, but would have to be demand driven. It would have to be something where there would be third-party payers who would support that kind of work for local nonprofits. And this would have to be something through which you would have to mobilize a lot of human capital. You would have to mobilize faculty, other experts to ultimately be the technical assistance providers. So that's just another important consideration as you imagine a center like this one coming into being. And seminar and certificate programs, providing seminars, that's something obviously that the Valdry Center has been doing and continues to do. That's something that we imagine becoming fully functional by the third year. And then these final two pieces, educational initiatives for educational institutions. So we were talking about building a culture of philanthropy at Southern University, being incredibly successful at it here at Southern, and then using that as a way of developing technical assistance services for other HBCUs, particularly lesser known HBCUs that have smaller endowments, that don't have as robust alumni giving programs, that this would be an avenue to add a new dimension of support for HBCUs in terms of building their own philanthropy. And then research was the final piece that we were imagining, and that was to leverage the knowledge that is coming out of the work of the Valdry Center and writing about it, developing assessments. We have to tell the story. It's so important to tell the story about the Valdry Center itself, as well as the kind of learning that comes out of providing the technical assistance, engaging in the community, providing the capacity building support. So just wanted to give you that so you have a sense of what was envisioned. That was in 2017. So now we start to talk a little bit about present day. So the center has clearly been successful to a degree and clearly has active programming and has played a role in the community and on the campus. There are new partnerships that have developed, such as a partnership with the Hewlett Foundation, which has resulted in a $500,000 investment to continue some of the programming, which is important. I mentioned that some of the endowment support that we had been hoping for from the Kellogg Foundation did not come through, but still there are other opportunities that came. One of the things we knew early on is that it has to become a thing and it has to be successful. And then when it's successful, then there will be greater opportunities to bring in resources from other places in the long run. And so that, I think, is just a continuous lesson and guidance point for the future work as we go forward. Clearly, the degree programs are fully underway. There are research endeavors that are taking place right now. So there's already work going on in terms of African American giving to traditional nonprofit programs and historically Black institutions. And also the presence of the Valdry Center has been beneficial to Southern University on various levels because its presence has the capacity. You see the building immediately as you come on campus, you learn of the work, there's an active degree program. So it's something that the Southern University as an institution can be proud of and can leverage and fundraise for in various capacities. So that's been important. And of course, various people have benefited from the work of the Valdry Center, such as graduate students who have been enrolled in the degree program. And there's been active engagement from trustees of the university, board members of the foundation, advisory board members of the Valdry Center. So there's been active engagement of leadership on lots of levels. Just to point out some challenges in terms of this journey along the way to make the Valdry Center a real thing. Obviously, there's a level of collaboration that really is required. You know, some of this is about the Valdry Center's own capacity and own human capital to be able to build so many different relationships. We knew that we were being ambitious all those years ago with those 7 components and all those ideas that we were putting on the table. And we were trying to be very realistic about how to phase them in over time. But as realistic as you can be in terms of your vision for the future, the reality is that work still needs to get done, and it's very time consuming and it involves a lot of work. So there's still a lot to be done in terms of collaborating with nonprofits, in terms of the capacity building work, for example. And what is the infrastructure and leadership for the Valdry Center in itself? How many people are working in the structure and leading as dedicated work specific to the Valdry Center's work as a whole? That is something that hasn't been fully built out. Securing those resources, that social entrepreneurship work, there was obviously a great idea, to be able to provide resources and support for cohorts of social entrepreneurs to turn their ideas into real organizations that are having an impact in the community. But that is costly. And so taking into account how to generate the resources for that. The seminars, obviously, how do you do seminars on a consistent basis and with substantial attendance? And so the seminars, of course, are real assets that need to get out there. Uh, and so how do you get those seminars connected to as large a population who might benefit from them as possible? Uh, just awareness around the concept of philanthropy, and it takes time when there hasn't been as much of a history in place. So kind of that basic awareness and growth and development, there's still always people, when you use the word philanthropy, there's still a lot of people who say philanthropy, and, for people who know it and they're inside of that field and they know that work, yeah, they get that immediately. But there are a lot of other people who don't immediately resonate with that language, philanthropy. So there's still a fair amount to be done in that kind of communications front, the translation, understand why it's important to you and how it makes a difference in your life and why you should be involved in philanthropy. There's a lot there that needs to be considered. And so how do you integrate nonprofit and philanthropic studies fully into curriculum is something that really is an important consideration as well. And so just to take a look back at some of those seven components, just a quick review in terms of what we originally envisioned and how they evolved over time. So the degree program, clearly, that is something that is active. It is active at the graduate level. And some interesting benefits that some of the people who are enrolled in the degree programs are people like local and state officials. So something like that, you see real, direct, tangible community benefit from that kind of programming. And that is just demonstrating again the value in terms of impact at the university level, but also in the community level. A bachelor's level, that will be evolved over time. And again, that collaboration with Nelson Mandela College. So the Valdry Center did not have to create from scratch a degree program. It was able to harness an existing degree program and connect it to the mission and the work of the Valdry Center. So it really is a partnership, and that partnership works on a lot of different levels. Uh, and the Social Entrepreneurship Fellowship Program, again, we agreed ultimately that this was ambitious, and there weren't really the resources to make it happen. And, this is a conversation that could be had with other potential supporters, such as the Hewlett Foundation. The faith programming, as I mentioned, at the time when we were talking about it, this was a direct demand-driven conversation where we were really given the idea and the impression that there was an immediate desire to pay for technical assistance to local churches, and just didn't materialize. And that's just a reality of things that happen and how things evolve when we think about a program like Valdry. And customized nonprofit capacity building. that involves a lot of work, involves a lot of people, a lot of staff capacity, as I mentioned before. So the idea is still there. It's still considered to be one of the 6 strands, but it is challenging building that trust with nonprofit organizations. Uh, and but I will also say that there was a demand-driven conversation that took place there as well, that we had good reason to believe that there were going to be third-party supporters, such as local foundations, who would want to make an investment in providing capacity building services for local nonprofits. And so, sometimes when there is just so much on the plate to try to get done and to move in a burgeoning initiative effort like the Valdry Center, not everything becomes real. So there are many aspects that did become real in the Valdry Center, but then there are many things that just really require more time, more resources, more partnership, more capacity. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Seminars and certificates, this is something that's obviously continuing to happen and has been largely successful. And there are opportunities to build on it over time. So that's just something to really consider going forward. And educational initiatives for educational institutions, that just requires a lot of work. It was kind of based on the premise of Southern University's philanthropic success, in some ways depending on that. So that's something needs to be built in itself, to then become that sort of technical assistance arm for other HBCUs. So there's work to be done to make that more real. And then the research piece, as I mentioned before, there are research initiatives that are already underway, and that's something that probably developed faster than we originally envisioned and imagined. And just some quick discoveries in terms of things that weren't planned. Never really knew for sure the degree of engagement of the leadership at the institution, and so that has been just a real uh, encouraging discovery. Just the level of engagement of leadership, and many leaders were interviewed as a part of that original feasibility study. So people were kind of bought into the process early in the stage. So I do think that there's probably some benefit accruing from some of that early engagement around the idea of the Valdry Center. And then, as I mentioned, the research piece was something that really developed. The idea of revenue is so crucial to a center like this, and how does that develop over time? And so there is an endowment, though, and of course, it's just incredible to have the kind of alumni support that makes the Valdry Center a real thing, from the Valdry family, the Valdry brothers, and then the other resources that have been raised that have enabled the development of a relatively modest endowment, but an endowment nonetheless. So having that has been important, and uh, you know, the founding donors contributed to that endowment, and there have been new partnerships, as I mentioned, such as the Hewlett Foundation. And there are some donors who have been contributing as well, and the advisory board members have also been contributing. So those have been really important and encouraging developments for the Valdry Center. And then just looking ahead, some of the things that I've discussed with Al, and Al's not in the room anymore, expanding the degree programming, and then looking at other types of seminar programming that could develop over time. Are there specific topics? One of the things we talked about with the seminars in the early days is there a particular theme to just make a seminar series with a certificate attached to it? How does that kind of work evolve? And just building on the research that has begun as another important consideration going into the future. And just other things to think about toward the future, just financial resources and increasing that endowment. The endowment, obviously, what's so important when we think about endowment support is obviously there's a security that comes with that. But overall, there's also this the unrestricted gifts, and being able to get as much in terms of resources as possible into the Valdry Center that is not restricted, that really does kind of allow for the flexibility to build on the vision that the Valdry Center is continuing to develop. And just is there on the human capital side, the ability to really have a director over the entire work of the center, and to continue to recruit advisory board members who are thought leaders in the field and who understand the work of the center is something to think about as well. So I'll just close with some thoughts on organizational life cycles, because clearly the Valdry Center has been a startup. All organizations, initiatives, they have an evolutionary process. And there are particular experiences that are typical in different stages of organizational growth and development. So the Valdry Center really has been in that kind of startup phase. And in the startup phase, there's a lot of vision, there's a lot of excitement. That was all very palpable when we were doing the feasibility study from all of the different conversations, because it just helped us imagine the range of possibilities. And, we were at 7 strands in there. We could have put 12 strands in there from some of the other ideas that were coming up. The fact that this is at an HBCU does create unique forms of excitement, because it hasn't been done before. And there are opportunities that come with being at an HBCU that you wouldn't find in a center on philanthropy based elsewhere. So there's so much opportunity. And I know from the national field, whenever I tell people about the Valdry Center, there's excitement. I know that the Valdry Center was able to recruit some very notable leaders in the national philanthropic and nonprofit fields to be on the advisory board because of the excitement about the potential of something like the Valdry Center, especially something like the Valdry Center at an HBCU. So there's a lot of excitement around the whole idea in that early phase. And, but the reality is there are a lot of startups that don't make it. So the question that was in my head after my early conversations with the Kellogg Foundation was, can this be done? Right? Can this be done? But the reality that we're seeing is, yes, it can. It can be done. You can have an endowed center on philanthropy at a historically Black college or university that has a building, that has programming, that has supportive alumni, that has numerous potential opportunities for partnerships with national foundations and others. It's the real thing. It is here. So there are lots of ideas that never materialize. And so with all of the challenges that may be ahead or may have been experienced in the history of the Valdry Center, it has been successful in terms of getting to the point where it is right now. So part of this is figuring out, well, what is next? And so there's more attention on the program side of things in those early phases of development, and probably less attention on some of the things like structure and decision making and systems and operations and things like that. So building that over time is important. And obviously many startups encounter financial challenges, and so whatever challenges the Valdry Center has faced, they've really been able to overcome them on lots of levels. And so obviously now we're really thinking about the Valdry Center transitioning into a next phase of development. And so we don't know exactly what's going to happen at this point in time. And, I would love the opportunity to continue to communicate with Al and others about what that future looks like, and to be able to do some of that same kind of work that led to the original feasibility study to help envision what the next phase looks like. And I think there are some real questions to consider, in that next phase of development and growth. Where should the Valdry Center be housed within the broader university, the foundation system? And right now, it's housed at the Southern University Foundation, and it is what it is. Is there anything to review about that reality? Are there other opportunities in other parts of the university? It's just a conversation to have. How should the Valdry Center structure its leadership? What should that look like? How do you develop leadership in a way that enables the actualization of that vision in all of its dimensions, with lots of support and attention to all of those program pieces that the Valdry Center wants to be, those 6 strands, for example, making that all real together. What should be the primary focus of the Valdry Center's programming? As I mentioned, we could have had many, many, many other strands. We ultimately came up with 7, and now there are 6. Maybe there should be fewer. Who knows, right? There should be some reflection on what that is, and I think that's the reality of maturing organizations. One thing the Valdry Center really needs to consider is, well, what primarily will the Valdry Center be known for? Maybe it's known for the building at this point in time. Maybe all of you have different ideas about what the Valdry Center is primarily known for at this point in time. But what is that signature piece of work that the Valdry Center will be known for primarily, where it can have the greatest level of impact, and that becomes sort of a driver, a center of excellence. I know in Southern University, there are obviously some particular parts of the university, like your nursing program, which are really considered centers of excellence that are kind of major assets. What's that for the Valdry Center? So I think that's kind of an important thing to think about. And the whole question of the feasibility, right? Feasible to do, feasible not to do. So, and that's always hard for organizations coming out of that startup phase, because the startup phase is about vision. It's about opportunity and possibility. And then, but over time, when you develop a more stable entity, there are these real practical questions about what to do and what not to do, and possibly phasing out some things that you may have really, really wanted to make happen, but perhaps just shouldn't happen at this time, given resources or the like. How can the Valdry Center really build on its primary strengths? Obviously, there are multiple strengths that I've mentioned and that from experience with the Valdry Center that can be built on. How can the Valdry Center expand its endowment? As I mentioned, we had an original plan for what that endowment might look like and where those resources might come from. But it's great that the endowment is here. How do you expand it? Who are the other funders for that? And how should the Valdry Center approach collaboration with other programs from around the country, that have similar interests? So the Valdry Center really has almost boundless opportunities, partly because what I've been mentioning over and over, that it has this unique role and opportunity because it's at an HBCU. And that role is here, but that role is also national, because there are no other Valdry centers at HBCUs, and there's a story to be told there. There are opportunities to be developed. There are linkages and partnerships that can be developed with many other organizations, non-HBCUs, leaders in philanthropy and the like. There's much to be said there, and there's much to be learned from the Valdry Center story. And in what ways can the Valdry Center enhance external communication about its work? We have to tell that story, as I mentioned before. It's an important story about the Valdry Center. It's historic, really, when you think about it. It's a pioneer. It's the first. And so there's a lot there. What do we learn from that? What are the lessons? What are the opportunities for the future? And just really in conclusion, it's become a real thing. It's a viable thing. It's real. It's the first of its kind. It's at an HBCU. It's leveraged existing academic degree programs successfully. Just like we discussed in the feasibility study, that its opportunity has been various initiatives that have impacted the university as well as local communities. And there have been certainly some challenges, but the vision being developed around the current 6 strands is important and has great potential. And obviously, the unrestricted funding, getting that unrestricted funding, I think is so crucial for the future success of the Valdry Center. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention. I want to again appreciate being here in this building at the Valdry Center, and appreciate the opportunity to be back here at Southern University and reflect back all the way to my first visit here in 2016. And it is just thrilling to see what has been accomplished since that time. So thanks again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Maurrasse. I'm going to vet some questions now from the audience, but again, I want to thank everybody for being here with us today in person, and those of you who are live on YouTube. Again, we started the YouTube this particular academic year so that those who couldn't be in attendance could view it again after the fact. Last year, we were able to provide 2 seminars. One was Harry Williams with Thurgood Marshall College Fund. And we also had Dr. Amir Pasick, who's the dean of the School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. I want to share, we had about 2,000 viewers, those who were in person and those online from our YouTube and Facebook Live. So it's working, and that's what we need to be able to show the opportunities that we have here that we're sharing in the field of philanthropy. So thank you, Mr. Maurrasse, for this wonderful presentation here. Do I have any questions before I ask my questions? Anyone? Oh, come on, just something. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Maurrasse. I appreciated you giving us so much detail in the history of the Valdry Center, specifically being the first of its kind on an HBCU campus is a big deal. How do you envision that we can really stand in that space of expertise and being a first of its kind and really owning that throughout the nation and globally as we are the leaders in that space?
Yeah, thank you for that really important question. I think telling that story, as I mentioned, I left off there about telling this story. It's so important to capture, what does it look like? Could there be a comprehensive case summary of the work of the Valdry Center to date? And in that summary, talks specifically about the uniqueness of the center being at an HBCU and the opportunity that comes with that. And then communications, right? Getting that out there. And so maybe doing some national seminars or panels at conferences in philanthropy, partnering with some of those national organizations. There are multiple conferences that take place in philanthropy across the country. So getting that word out there, I think, is really important. And of course, continuing to do the work and continuing to do that work successfully is a key component of that as well. Looking for opportunities to communicate with other HBCUs about the Valdry Center model and method, and how it may be instructive or useful in their particular experiences. So it feels like there's a lot that can be done. And I think for a maturing organization, as we're talking about that evolution, those are the kinds of things that, you ultimately end up thinking about, right? You're doing the work in the beginning, you've got the vision, it's become a real thing. And then it becomes, well, what does this mean? What can we learn from this? And who needs to hear that? And how can we build on that? And quite frankly, I think that work also drives fundraising, because when you're able to tell that story and tell it effectively and make that case over and over and over again about the uniqueness of this center, how it has uniquely leveraged the capacity and potential of an HBCU to have an impact in this particular content area, I think that broadens the audience of people who know about Valdry and also broadens the audience of prospective donors and funders.
Thank you very much for that question. Any more questions at this time? Okay, well, thank you very much. So right now, briefly, as you all can see, our slideshow is sharing with you all our upcoming event that is on March the 6th here in the Valdry Center as well as virtually. We're going to have two powerful female foundation leaders. If you signed up for this lecture, you probably were given the opportunity to see the future opportunity we're going to have here in March. So thank you very much for being present. But I have a few, some summaries and some updates for those of you who are here. What's next was asked by Mr. Maurrasse, and what's next is demolition. What I mean by demolition is the two buildings next to us, east of the Valdry Center, are two facilities. They're about to be torn down, demolished. Why? Because we are ready to build more opportunities for research, more opportunities for student engagement. And thanks to you all who are listening today, who have donated to the Southern University System Foundation. Because of that, that's going to happen soon. I also want to share the degree program is expanding. What I mean by that is the executive Ph.D. program that's held here at the Nelson Mandela School of Government and Public Policy. We have joined with the dean, Damian Ejigiri, and our board member, advisory board member, Amir Pasik. He spoke in November. We are collaborating now to do what I would call cross-enrollment opportunities for students at Indiana University in the College of the School of Philanthropy, the first in the nation, with the first HBCU Center for Philanthropy here at Southern University. What's next? We are currently, this particular seminar is approved for the Certified Fundraiser Executive Program. This is where many of our fundraisers nationwide do their continuing education to learn and do a better job at fundraising. And so this particular lecture is approved for 1.5 credit hours for that. So I wanted to make sure I shared that with you all. So we are progressing and making sure that the opportunities for the seminars that we put out have a purpose for others in this field. What's next? Our capital campaign. We do have here today our VPs who are going to structure the capital campaign campus-wide, system-wide, nationwide. And so you all are going to see much, much more activities, seminars, programs, opportunities, courses, etc., through the Valdry Center for Philanthropy. So that's our what's next. And again, here on the screen, we have our next March 6th seminar from 1 o'clock to 2:30. And thanks to the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation for the grant support for our seminars that we're having over the next 2 to 3 years. We're doing a great job bringing this to you, and we do hope that you follow us here at the Valdry Center for Philanthropy on the campus of Southern University and A&M College in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Mr. Maurrasse, I would be remiss if I did not share with you a token of appreciation. When you entered, for those of you who may not have paid attention or here for the first time, we have a mural on the wall outside. And that mural is an image of the bluff. So, sir, you will receive this image framed at your location soon. So anyone else have any other questions for us today? If not, your time is as valuable as ours is. I want to thank you all for being here today at the Valdry Center for Philanthropy on the campus of Southern University, where the team members of the Southern University System Foundation have gathered together to present this to you all. I bid you farewell to you online. Thank you so much. I didn't get any questions. I got lots of comments. We thank you so much. And the QR code is going to be sent to you soon, virtually, and also here on the programs. So you can tell us, what do you want to hear next? Thank you. Goodbye.